They said humans were fragile. They said humans broke too easily to survive the vampire world. And they said, without hesitation, without mercy, that a human woman could never carry a vampire's child and live. Elena Hart learned early what it meant to be invisible. She scrubbed marble floors in the lower halls of Blackthorn Citadel, her knees aching, fingers raw from cold water and harsh soap. Every night, she slept in a narrow servant's room beneath the east tower, where the stone walls never fully warmed and the wind whispered through cracks like it was searching for something it had lost. She had no family left, no coin to her name, and no protection in a kingdom ruled by immortals who barely noticed human breath. To the vampires she was a maid. To the other servants she was an easy target. To the world she was nothing. That morning the humiliation came early. A senior steward snapped his fingers at her in the grand corridor, his voice sharp enough to cut stone. "You missed a spot," he said, pointing to a floor already gleaming. When Elena knelt again, a passing noblewoman laughed softly and deliberately stepped into the wet polish, smearing her heel across Elena's work. "Humans," the noblewoman muttered. "Always messy." The laughter echoed. Elena lowered her head and said nothing. She had learned that silence kept her alive. What none of them noticed was the quiet strength in her hands, the way she worked carefully, the way she always stopped to help injured servants, the way she spoke softly to frightened castle children when the night storms rattled the towers. Kindness was the only power she had ever been allowed. And kindness was exactly what caught the attention of the most dangerous being in the kingdom. King Lucien Draven had ruled the night court for over 4 centuries. His name alone froze conversations. His presence emptied rooms. Tall, pale, and sharp-eyed, he moved through his castle like a shadow given purpose. Controlled, distant, feared. He had buried queens. He had watched kingdoms rise and rot. He trusted no one. On the morning Elena was humiliated in the corridor, Lucien stood on the upper balcony, unseen, listening. He watched the noblewoman scuff the floor. He watched the steward sneer. And he watched the human girl bow her head instead of breaking. Most humans begged. Some cried. Others cursed. She simply endured. Something in Lucien's chest shifted, an old, dangerous feeling he thought had died centuries ago. That night the storm came. Thunder shook the towers. Wind howled through the battlements. Elena was sent to carry linens across the outer courtyard, even as rain soaked her thin cloak and lightning cracked overhead. When her foot slipped on wet stone, she fell hard, pain blooming in her side. She would have stayed there. No one would have noticed. Except Lucien did. He appeared beside her without sound, cloak untouched by rain, eyes glowing faintly silver in the stormlight. Elena froze, terror locking her limbs. No human maid stood alone with the Vampire King and survived on rumor alone. "Why are you out here?" he asked, voice calm but heavy with authority. I was ordered, my king," she whispered, trembling. "I'll move faster." She tried to rise. Pain cut through her breath. Lucien crouched, not towering, not threatening, and for the first time in decades he reached toward a human without hunger. He offered his hand. She stared at it like it might vanish. "You're injured," he said. "I'm fine," she lied out of habit. Lucien's jaw tightened. "You are brave," he said quietly, "and you should not be punished for obedience." He lifted her effortlessly, carrying her out of the rain and into the warmth of the inner halls. Servants stared. Nobles whispered. The king did not slow. From that night on, everything changed. Elena was reassigned, not to harder labor but to the west wing, closer to the royal chambers. She was given warmer clothes, proper meals. And sometimes when she thought no one noticed, she felt eyes on her, watchful, protective. Lucien never spoke of it. He protected her without explanation. And Elena never asked why. Weeks passed. Then came the sickness. At first it was small, dizziness, exhaustion, strange dreams filled with warmth and shadow. The castle healers dismissed her complaints. "Humans are weak," one said. "Rest." But Lucien noticed when she nearly collapsed while serving tea. He summoned the royal physician himself. The room went silent as the physician knelt, trembling after the examination. "My king," the man whispered, face pale. "This is impossible." Lucien's eyes darkened. "Explain." "She is with child," the physician said. "And the child carries ancient blood." The words fell like a blade. A human. Pregnant. With a vampire's child. Elena sat frozen, hands clutching her apron, confusion and fear crashing together. "That can't be," she said softly. "I would know." Lucien looked at her, not with anger, not with doubt, but with a gravity that shook the room. "The impossible," he said, has a habit of choosing the humble. Outside the chamber, whispers began to spread. Inside the kingdom, laws older than mercy stirred awake. And far beyond the castle walls, enemies who believed this child should never be born began to move. By dawn, the entire citadel knew. Whispers slid through stone corridors faster than servants could clean them away. A human maid. Pregnant. Carrying royal blood. Some said it with disbelief, others with revulsion, but no one said it softly. Elena felt the change before anyone spoke to her directly. Doors closed faster. Conversations stopped when she entered a room. Eyes followed her, not curious but calculating, as if her body itself had become a crime scene. She was moved from her familiar servant quarters into a guarded chamber near the west wing. It was warmer, quieter, and far more frightening. Protection felt too much like a cage. Guards stood outside her door at all hours, their faces expressionless. No one explained anything. No one asked how she felt. Elena sat alone most nights, hands folded over her stomach, trying to understand how her life had split in two so quickly. One day she was invisible. The next she was dangerous. The healers returned again and again, their examinations colder now, their questions sharper. They spoke of ancient impossibilities and unstable bloodlines, never once asking Elena if she was afraid. She heard one whisper that such a child could bring war. Another suggested ending the pregnancy before it ended the realm. Those words stayed with her. When Lucien visited, it was always late, always brief. He stood at a careful distance, as if afraid his presence might worsen the scrutiny on her. He asked if she was eating. She was sleeping. If anyone had mistreated her. He never spoke of the council. Never spoke of consequences. That silence hurt more than anger would have. Elena began to wonder if she had imagined his kindness in the rain. If his protection had limits she didn't yet understand. She feared that when the kingdom forced him to choose, she already knew who would lose. Outside her guarded room, the court sharpened its claws. The vampire elders convened emergency councils. Scholars pulled forbidden texts from sealed archives. Priestesses of the old blood declared the pregnancy an abomination. They argued that nature itself rejected such unions. That Elena must have tricked the king. That mercy now would mean catastrophe later. Their cruelty was clean and well-spoken. Servants who once bullied Elena now looked at her with hatred instead of mockery. Some spat behind her back. Others crossed themselves in old superstitions. One accused her openly of seducing the king for power. Another said humans had always been parasites and this was proof. Elena did not defend herself. Instead, she continued to help where she could. She brought water to tired guards. She comforted a trembling young vampire servant whose brother had been conscripted out of fear of coming war. When a noble child fainted in the hall, Elena was the one who knelt first, tearing her sleeve to bind a bleeding hand. Every small kindness felt like defiance. Lucien noticed all of it. He watched from shadows and balconies, learning her the way one learns truth slowly. He saw how she bowed her head when insulted but straightened her back afterward. He saw how others began to quiet when she entered, not because they respected her yet, but because her calm unsettled them. Still he said nothing publicly. That restraint nearly broke her. The council summons arrived on the 7th night. Elena was escorted through towering doors into the high chamber, a space built to make mortals feel small. Elder vampires sat in a wide arc, their eyes glowing faintly, their expressions carved from centuries of certainty. She stood alone in the center, no chair, no advocate. They did not greet her. They debated her. She cannot be allowed to carry it, one elder said. The risk is unacceptable, said another. If she lives, others will try, a third warned. Elena's heart pounded, but she did not cry. She thought of every night she had slept hungry, every insult she had swallowed, every time she had helped someone anyway. If this was the end, she would meet it standing. When she was finally permitted to speak, the room expected begging. Instead, Elena bowed her head and said quietly that she never intended to disrupt their world, that she had never asked for power or favor, that if her life truly endangered peace, she would not resist their judgment. Her voice shook, but she did not take it back. That humility cracked the room. And that was when Lucien stood. The sound of his movement silenced centuries of argument. He stepped into the light, his presence undeniable now, no longer distant or restrained. His gaze moved across the council, steady and cold. He did not shout. He did not threaten. He claimed. He declared the child his responsibility. He reminded them that ancient laws did not exist only to control, but to protect. That punishing innocence was not order, it was fear wearing tradition like armor. He named Elena not as a temptress, but as a human who showed compassion when vampires had forgotten how. For the first time, the kingdom saw him not as a monster, but as a king choosing mercy over convenience. The council did not agree, but they did not condemn her either. The decision was postponed. The danger delayed, not removed. As Elena was escorted back to her chamber, the castle felt different. Heavier. Divided. Some bowed to her now, not deeply, not sincerely, but they bowed. Others stared with open resentment. Lucien walked beside her this time. He did not touch her. But he stayed. And as the doors closed behind them, the truth settled in both their hearts. This child had already changed the kingdom. The first sign that something was truly wrong came in Elena's dreams. She dreamed of fire beneath her skin and voices speaking in a language she did not know, yet somehow understood. The words were old, older than the castle, older than the kingdom itself. When she woke, her hands sometimes glowed faintly in the dark, veins lit like silver threads. By morning the light was gone, leaving only exhaustion and fear behind. The healers grew uneasy. They whispered about blood awakening and crossed lineages. Some refused to examine her at all, claiming the pregnancy violated sacred boundaries. Others stayed only long enough to record symptoms, their faces pale with unease. Elena overheard one mutter that the child's heartbeat sounded wrong, not weak but too strong. Lucien increased her protection without explanation. Additional guards appeared. Corridors near her chambers were sealed at night. Food and water were tested twice. Elena noticed that even high-ranking nobles were denied access. She didn't need to ask why. Fear had settled into the castle like a second shadow. Despite the danger, Elena's body grew weaker. She fainted during morning prayers. Her hands shook when she tried to pour tea. The child inside her seemed to draw more than life. It drew energy, warmth, even memory. Elena sometimes felt as though something ancient was leaning toward consciousness through her. One night, during a violent storm, the pain began. It wasn't like anything she'd known. Not sickness. Not injury. It felt like her blood was being rewritten, each heartbeat echoing with unfamiliar power. She collapsed in her chamber, breath shallow, vision blurring. Lucien reached her before the guards could call for help. For the first time he broke his composure. He knelt beside her, gripping the bed frame hard enough to crack wood, his eyes glowing bright with fear he refused to name. When the healers hesitated, he commanded. When they argued, he silenced them. He stayed through the night, watching over her as if vigilance alone could keep her alive. And when she whispered his name in pain, something in him crossed a line he could never step back from. The council responded with cruelty disguised as reason. They declared the pregnancy unstable. Dangerous. A threat not just to Elena but to the balance of power. They proposed ancient containment rituals, rituals that would weaken or possibly kill her to save the realm. Others argued the child should be destroyed before it was born. Elena overheard everything. Instead of fear, something new took root in her, resolve. She asked to see the old archives. The request shocked everyone, including Lucien. Humans were forbidden from accessing vampire historical records. But Elena insisted, her voice steady in a way it had never been before. She said she needed to understand what was happening to her body, and to the child she carried. Lucien granted permission. Deep beneath the citadel, among dust-covered tomes and forbidden scrolls, Elena discovered something no one expected. When she touched certain texts, the ancient language from her dreams rose unbidden to her lips. Symbols glowed. Seals loosened. The past responded to her as if recognizing something it had been waiting for. She was not just human. Long ago, before humans and vampires became enemies, there had been blood-bound guardians, humans who carried dormant magic meant to stabilize vampire power, not rival it. Their line had been hunted into near extinction because their existence challenged the idea of vampire supremacy. Elena was descended from them. The child she carried was not an abomination, it was a convergence. This truth terrified the council. If revealed, it would dismantle centuries of propaganda. It would prove humans were not weak by nature, only oppressed. It would mean the kingdom's foundation was built on fear, not necessity. That night, assassins entered the castle. They did not wear enemy colors. They bore the insignia of noble houses. Elena was their target. The attack was swift and silent, but it failed. Lucien fought like a storm given form, but it was Elena who saved them both. When cornered, fear unlocked what training never could. She spoke the ancient words instinctively, creating a barrier of light that repelled the attackers and stunned the guards alike. The power faded as quickly as it came. Elena collapsed into Lucien's arms. For the first time he held her openly. Not as king and subject. Not as protector and burden. But as two lives bound by something greater than fear. In the aftermath, the truth could no longer be hidden. Lucien confronted the council with evidence from the archives and his own testimony. Some elders broke. Others doubled down. The kingdom fractured along ideological lines. Elena recovered slowly, changed but alive. She was no longer just protected. She was becoming necessary. Lucien realized then that the greatest threat was no longer the council or the nobles. It was time. The child was awakening faster than anyone predicted. And the closer its birth came, the more the world would try to tear Elena apart to control what she carried. As he stood beside her window that night, watching dawn creep into a world that feared change, Lucien made a silent vow. No matter the cost, he would not let the kingdom destroy the one thing that had finally taught him what it meant to hope. By the time Elena could walk the length of the West Wing without assistance, the kingdom was already changing around her. The truth uncovered in the archives could no longer be contained. Whispers turned into arguments. Arguments turned into sides. Vampires who had quietly questioned the old laws for centuries now spoke aloud, emboldened by the evidence Elena represented. Others grew more rigid, clinging to tradition as if fear itself were sacred. Elena felt the shift in every corridor she passed through. Some bowed with genuine respect now. Others refused to meet her eyes. A few looked at her with something close to awe, not because she sought power, but because she carried it without cruelty. She remained gentle, still offering help to servants and guards alike, still speaking softly, still listening. But the danger followed her like a shadow. The council issued a decree. Elena was to remain under protective confinement until the child was born. They called it safety. Everyone knew it was control. She was not allowed beyond the inner halls. Windows were barred with enchantments disguised as blessings. Her freedom narrowed to a few rooms and guarded gardens. Lucien accepted the decree publicly. Privately, it nearly destroyed him. He walked the battlements at night, rage coiled tight beneath his calm. Every law he had once upheld now felt like a weapon turned inward. Yet he understood the balance he walked. Defiance too early would cost Elena everything. Inside the confinement, Elena struggled with a quieter war. The child grew stronger each day, and with that strength came moments she could not control. Candles flickered when she grew anxious. Stone warmed beneath her palms. She began hearing the ancient language even while awake, whispering guidance and warning in equal measure. She feared herself. One evening, when she shattered a glass without touching it, Elena broke down in tears. She begged Lucien to tell her the truth, that she was becoming something dangerous. He did not deny her power. Instead, he told her she was becoming necessary. That night marked a turning point between them. Lucien stopped pretending distance could protect them. He began staying longer, speaking more openly, not of love but of responsibility, of fear, of the cost of rulership. Elena listened, and in doing so, softened places in him that had been locked for centuries. Their bond deepened quietly. No declarations. No promises. Just trust. Beyond the castle, unrest spread. Human villages near vampire territory were being harassed for their own safety. Vampire patrols increased. Old alliances cracked. Everyone feared what the child might become, but fear rarely stays still. It looks for targets. The council, divided and desperate, made a final decision. They announced a binding ceremony. Ancient and irreversible, the ritual would tether the child's power to the throne itself. It would ensure loyalty, control, and obedience, but it carried immense risk. The mother might not survive it. The child would be born bound, its will shaped before it could choose. Elena was not asked. When she learned of the ceremony, something in her hardened. She had accepted humiliation. She had accepted confinement. She would not accept her child being used. For the first time, Elena defied the council openly. She refused the ritual. The reaction was swift and brutal. Elders accused her of manipulation. Guards tightened their watch. Lucien was summoned and warned that refusal could be interpreted as rebellion. For the first time since he became king, his authority was challenged in full view of the court. Lucien stood silent through the accusations. Then he spoke words no one expected. He declared the binding ceremony unlawful without the mother's consent. He invoked ancient protector laws long ignored, laws written when guardians and vampires stood together. He declared Elena under royal protection, not as a subject but as a sovereign life. The room exploded. Some elders stormed out. Others threatened abdication. A few pledged loyalty on the spot. The kingdom fractured completely. That night, an attempt was made to take Elena by force. Failed, not because of guards or walls, but because Elena finally chose to stand. When soldiers breached her chamber, the ancient language rose from her throat, not in anger but command. The castle itself responded. Doors sealed. Stone shifted. Power moved through her like a river. She no longer fought. She did not attack. She stopped them. When it was over, Elena collapsed, shaken but alive. Lucien reached her, lifting her with a care that spoke louder than any vow. In that moment he knew. She was no longer just the woman he protected. She was the future the kingdom was afraid of. By dawn, the truth was undeniable. Elena could not be bound. The child could not be controlled. And Lucien could no longer rule a kingdom built on fear without becoming its enemy. As the sun rose over Blackthorn Citadel, Lucien stood before the divided court and made the most dangerous choice of his reign. He would change the laws. By the time Lucien announced his intent to change the laws, the kingdom was already on the brink of collapse. The court did not respond with debate. It responded with fear. Centuries of power had rested on the belief that vampires were superior by nature and right. Elena's existence, and the child she carried, threatened to undo that belief entirely. For some, reform felt like annihilation. The backlash was immediate. Several noble houses withdrew allegiance from the throne. Border strongholds closed their gates. Human settlements were blamed for unrest and punished in the name of preventive order. Violence crept closer to the castle each night, carried on rumors and sharpened by desperation. Elena felt the consequences deeply. She heard reports of humans being questioned, detained, even beaten because of her. Each story weighed on her heart, filling her with guilt and resolve in equal measure. She had never wanted power, but she refused to let others suffer because of her silence. Despite her advancing pregnancy, she insisted on speaking. Lucien resisted at first. He feared the strain on her body, the danger of exposing her to a divided court. But Elena was no longer the frightened maid who bowed her head to survive. She stood firm, her voice calm, her strength quiet but unshakable. She told him she would not hide while others paid the price. Their argument was soft, not angry, two people who cared deeply, afraid of losing each other. When Lucien finally agreed, it was with conditions and protection, but also with pride he could no longer conceal. The public assembly was unprecedented. Humans and vampires were summoned together into the great hall. No one remembered the last time such a gathering had occurred without chains or war. The tension was suffocating. Guards lined every wall. Nobles whispered. Humans stood stiffly, uncertain if this was justice or a trap. Elena entered beside Lucien. The reaction was electric. Some bowed. Others turned away. A few openly hissed. Elena felt it all, but she did not falter. When she spoke, her voice carried not command but truth. She spoke of fear. Of being powerless. Of surviving by kindness because cruelty had never been an option for her. She did not accuse. She did not threaten. She asked a single question that cut deeper than any blade. If my life is worth less because I was born human, she asked, then what does that make the child you fear? Silence followed. Not agreement, but listening. Lucien then spoke, not as a conqueror but as a witness. He admitted the kingdom had relied on fear for too long. That vampires had mistaken endurance for strength. That Elena had shown him a different kind of power, one that did not require domination. This moment marked the emotional peak of Part 5. The court did not suddenly unite. Change never works that way. But something irreversible happened. The narrative shifted. Elena was no longer framed as a threat alone. She became a mirror forcing the kingdom to see itself. That night the consequences came. A coalition of extremist nobles attempted a coup. They moved quickly, believing Lucien distracted and the castle divided. Their plan was simple. Kill Elena, destroy the child, and force Lucien back into absolute rule or remove him entirely. They underestimated one thing. The people. Servants warned guards. Human villagers lit signal fires. Even some vampires who once supported the old laws turned their backs on the conspirators. The uprising reached the castle gates, but it did not breach them. Still, blood was spilled. Elena was caught in the chaos. As violence echoed through the halls, labor began. Pain unlike anything she had known tore through her. The child reacted to the danger, power surging wildly. The castle itself trembled. Lucien fought his way to her side, his fear bare and unguarded. For the first time he begged. He begged her to stay. To fight. To live. Elena held his hand and told him something that broke him open. She told him that no matter what happened, He had already changed the world by choosing compassion when fear demanded cruelty. She told him their child would know that choice, even if she didn't live to see it. The birth did not come yet. But it was close enough to terrify everyone. The coup failed. The conspirators were captured or fled. Dawn found the kingdom bruised, shaken, and forced to confront the cost of its resistance. Elena survived the night, but she was weaker than ever. Lucien did not leave her side. The final realization settled heavily on both of them. The kingdom could no longer return to what it was. And neither could they. The child's birth would not just decide their fate, it would decide the future of two worlds. The night the child chose to be born, the world seemed to hold its breath. Blackthorn Citadel stood wrapped in unnatural stillness, the air heavy with a silence deeper than fear. No wind touched the banners. No torch flickered. Even the distant forests lay unnaturally calm, as though the land itself sensed that something ancient was about to be restored, or undone. Elena lay in the birth chamber surrounded by candlelight and quiet hands. Her body was exhausted beyond human limits. Weeks of strain, fear, and awakening power had left her pale and trembling. Each breath felt earned. Each heartbeat echoed with purpose. Lucien stood at her side, no longer king first but man. For centuries he had ruled wars without flinching. He had watched cities fall and empires rot. None of it had prepared him for the terror of watching the woman he loved fight for her life. He held her hand openly now, uncaring who saw. Titles meant nothing here. Only her did. Outside the chamber the kingdom waited. Vampire elders stood alongside human representatives for the first time in living memory. Some prayed. Some argued in whispers. Others simply watched the doors, fear written plainly across immortal faces. No one knew what would happen if the child survived, or if Elena did not. The old prophecies stirred. Scrolls long dismissed as metaphor now burned with relevance. They spoke of a child born of shadow and breath, of power tempered by mercy, of a bridge that could either unite or end two worlds. For generations, vampires had believed those stories referred to domination. They had been wrong. Inside the chamber, Elena cried out, not in fear but in determination. The ancient language flowed from her lips naturally now, not as command but as prayer. The power answered gently, wrapping the room in warmth instead of fire. Lucien felt it. For the first time in centuries, his hunger faded completely. His blood stilled. The beast he had mastered long ago fell silent, not suppressed but soothed. When the child was born there was no explosion of magic. No violence. No catastrophe. There was light. Soft, steady, unmistakably alive. The baby cried, a human sound, fragile and perfect. And yet, beneath it, something deeper pulsed. Power not wild, not cruel, but balanced. Ancient. Oh. Elena wept with relief. Lucien dropped to his knees. The child lived. So did she. Outside, the citadel exhaled. Walls warmed. Torches flared back to life. The unnatural stillness broke like a spell undone. Even the sky shifted, clouds parting to reveal the pale edge of dawn. The kingdom watched as Lucien emerged from the chamber carrying the child in his arms. Not hidden. Not protected behind ceremony. The baby's eyes opened briefly, dark, thoughtful, unafraid. No hunger burned there. No rage. Only awareness. A murmur rippled through the hall. Some elders bowed instinctively. Others stared in disbelief. A few wept openly, understanding too late what they had almost destroyed. Lucien spoke only once. He declared the child legitimate, not as a weapon, not as an heir bound by fear, but as a citizen of both worlds. He named Elena not as consort but as equal. Not because of blood but because of choice. There was no challenge. The moment had passed for rebellion. In the days that followed, the truth spread beyond the castle. Human villages reported strange changes. Crops grew healthier. Night predators retreated. Vampire patrols found themselves less driven by hunger, more aware of restraint. The balance between worlds began to shift, not through conquest but correction. The council reconvened. This time, Elena stood beside Lucien by choice, not summoned, not debated. She spoke again, but now her words carried weight earned through suffering. She asked for laws that protected the vulnerable. For shared courts where humans could testify. For an end to blood levies and preventive punishment. She did not demand vengeance. She demanded dignity. Some elders resisted. Others supported. But the child's existence made denial impossible. The old narrative, that humans existed to be ruled, had collapsed. Change began slowly, unevenly, but irrevocably. Lucien abdicated absolute authority. Not the throne, but the idea behind it. He restructured the kingdom into councils of balance. Vampire power remained, but no longer unchecked. Guardianship replaced dominance. Partnership replaced fear. For many it was the end of the world they knew. For others, it was the first time they believed the future might be kind. In quieter moments, Elena adjusted to motherhood. She held her child near windows where dawn brushed the stone. She sang softly, human songs her mother once sang to her in poverty-stricken rooms long forgotten. The baby slept peacefully, power resting instead of raging. Lucien watched them often. He learned the rhythm of a life not measured in centuries but in moments. He learned patience again. Joy. Fear without control. Love without command. One evening, as the kingdom settled into a fragile peace, Lucien finally spoke words he had never dared before. He told Elena he loved her. Not as destiny. Not as necessity. As choice. She did not answer immediately. Then she smiled, tired, honest, unafraid, and told him she had known long before he did. That love, she said, was never loud. It was what stayed. Years passed. The child grew, not faster than human children, not slower than vampire ones. Balanced, thoughtful, kind. When asked what they were, the child answered simply, "I belong." And the kingdom learned to live with that truth. Elena never became queen by crown. She became queen by influence. She walked freely through markets and halls, still listening, still helping, still refusing to forget what it meant to be powerless. People spoke to her without fear. They trusted her because she remembered their names. Lucien ruled differently now. Not from distance but presence. Together they oversaw a realm transformed, not perfect, not without conflict, but no longer built on cruelty masquerading as tradition. The story of the human girl who carried a vampire king's child became legend. But those who lived it remembered the truth. She had not changed the world with power. She had changed it with kindness that refused to disappear.